Good Saturday morning, and welcome back to another edition of National Congress of Black Women um, here at the Kitchen Table Talk, where talk empowers and becomes action, and action becomes transformative change. I welcome you back to another episode where today my guest is Mr. George Sample. Yay! He's the president, founder, and CEO of Blue Street Consulting. We're going to have a conversation today about, ooh, that scary word, but I'm going to say it DEI. Ooh, Mufasa. Let's demystify DEI, understand what it is, why it's not, and how we can take it back. Let's welcome our guest, Mr. George Sample.
Well, thanks so much. It is a pleasure to be here and part of this conversation.
It is a pleasure to have you here. And our returning guest, Ms. Ruth Gray, President of National Congress of Black Women. Today's conversation promises to be one of the most robust. Roll your sleeves up and let's get ready.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Sample, please tell us about what DEI is, why it's become this taboo and forbidden thing,
Yeah.
and how we can take it back, or do we need to shift and pivot?
Yeah. So we talk about the history of diversity, equity, inclusion work. I like saying the whole thing because DEI has been weaponized for purposes that we won't dive all the way into because we only have 30 minutes because that can be a few different hours. But you talk about the history of the work in our country. Our country has a very complicated history when it comes to diversity of all different types. So the diversity, equity, inclusion work has been put in place to make sure we can bridge from the things we put in place by our government to make sure that there was less power in certain factions of our population, but now to bridge that gap. So we talk about things like the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That's diversity, equity, inclusion work. We talk about the affirmative action work that was recently struck down by the executive orders by the Trump administration. That's diversity, equity, inclusion work. But that's work to make sure that we all have the opportunity to participate in our economy, the opportunity to participate and provide for our families. So this diversity, equity, inclusion work, each word diversity, making sure you have representation from all different types within our country. Equity, making sure everyone has the opportunity to fairly participate in what's going on. And then inclusion, making sure you can bring your voice into these rooms, because all those things have been challenged in different parts of our country's history. So it's a great opportunity for us to be able to dig into this topic and get into what's happening right now.
And so, what is happening right now? What is happening right now? A lot of people have a lot of angst. They have lots of concern.
Yeah.
I recently attended a town hall by Congresswoman Shontel Brown at one of the local, the East Professional Building,
Yeah.
in the auditorium, which holds 1,000 plus people. And would you believe 1,000 plus people showed up?
Plus, oh yeah, standing room only.
And one of the questions that she asked was, whose first time is it at a town hall? More than half of the folks in there raised their hand.
Yeah.
Which again shows the level of concern for our community. And I know that mirrors the concern across our nation.
Yeah.
And especially because, as you just mentioned, DEI has been weaponized, and these sweeping EOs are coming, and people they don't understand what's happening. They want to understand it, and people want to know what they can do
Yes.
to ensure that civil liberties and rights are protected.
Yeah.
So, what would you?
Well, let's dive into those executive orders you talked about. So there's two primary ones we want to talk about for the purpose of this conversation. First one was an executive order that talked about eliminating wasteful spending and wrongful DEI in the government. And I'm kind of misquoting it there, but that's basically what
Right.
the paraphrase of the title is. So with that one, it's for every government institution, because executive orders can impact government institutions. They're not law, and that's the key thing.
Right.
Executive orders are not law, but they can impact and direct the efforts of government institutions, federal government institutions. So for them, pulling back anything that was diversity, equity, inclusion kind of programs. The second executive order that we'll also talk about was talking about illegal DEI in the private sector. Now, let's really break down what that's saying. Illegal DEI in the private sector. When you go into the Title VI and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it clearly lays out what you can and cannot do in regards to enforcement of discrimination kind of laws. Now, it's really clear, it's really important to make clear that the executive orders cannot remove law. The Civil Rights Act is law. The executive orders can replace or remove other executive orders. So with that one talking about illegal DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion in private places, it is basically now we're going to enforce this a different way. But one thing I tell folks all the time now, as I talk to my clients, if your program was legal before and it was okay, it's still legal now. In that executive order, you'll see the exact verbiage, illegal DEI, multiple times. Because the government, no matter what their designs may be, they understand there's lots of legal diversity, equity, inclusion work to be done. So now it's time to make sure that we're focused on legal diversity, equity, inclusion work that's in line with what's outlined in Title VI and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
But one of the concerns is because we know that the executive orders are not law, and but they are directly dismantling. There is an attempt to dismantle the law.
Yeah.
Because if the executive orders go unchallenged,
Yes.
and they conflict with the law, many times they are conflictual with the law, and they go unchallenged, then there is silence, and silence is consent.
Yeah.
Acquiescence.
And so here is where the concern is that if we allow the silence to continue, then the law will catch up with the order.
Yeah.
And we will be in reverse.
Yeah.
And this is where the problem is. This is where the problem is because what we see happening, and if you understand the Constitution, and you understand how it was written and why it was written, and the three branches of government, and how one helps the other, or supports or provides checks and balances to the other, is that with that happening, the federal government and the executive branch will have a voice, will have the power and the control of Congress, and there's no checks and balances. And then what happens is the very concept, the very reason why we have a federal branch starts to dissipate. And we go back to state rule, major state rule. And you have to understand why there is a federal government and why there is a state government. And the federal government makes sure that we maintain a federal united front. And if we don't have certain laws in place for the federal government, the state government will have full control. And if they say no DEI, then who's to challenge it?
Yeah, and that's why it's so important for us to have this conversation to make sure folks have all the facts and understand. Because, part of this is to have people back away from the efforts that they have going on.
Right.
Without even saying, hey, what is the actual bounds of the law? What can it actually do? So it's so important for us to be able to educate the listeners in regards to this topic.
Absolutely. I love what you just said. So many people, they don't.
Yeah.
And I think with we had a conversation before with everything coming so fast and so hot. People are in a state of dismay, confusion, and we're hearing it everywhere. That is the intent.
Yes.
People are afraid.
Yeah.
And that is the intent. So that your fear paralyzes you. That is their hope. With that paralyzation, then they can go in, and like you said, they can begin to roll back things because we're not checking it.
Yes.
So it is so very important that we begin to raise our voices, educate, educate, because they've taken civics out, and I can't even, I don't know when civics was taken out of school, but I firmly believe our education system right now is we're raising a bunch of what I like to call worker bees, people who just don't know. You passed through the system, you've gotten straight A's, but you're only good to follow directions, not think critically, and certainly not at the level of, government, where you can make changes, where you have a seat, you're able to have a seat at the table, so that when things like this come, you know what to do. And I think that's why so many people right now, you have mass hysteria, because so many people just don't know what to do, where to go, who to turn to, how to take action.
Yeah.
So these conversations are important. What would you suggest as something actionable that people can do right now?
Well, going to what you just said in regards to our education, a big part that's missing right now is us in regards to critical thinking. Because if you just go on Google and you click the first few headlines, you'll see things that are written haphazardly, poorly clickbaity, in order to just get attention. It's so important for us to get the actual information from the actual sources. So I encourage folks to go directly to government websites to read actually what's going on, or going on to the websites of employment attorneys or different law firms, so you can get an actual more reasoned legal opinion in regards to it. Because there's so many different sources of information, they're just trying to stir up an emotion one way or the other. That information might not be the most pure information for you to pull from. So that's the first step in regards to what you're doing. The second step is really understanding what's happening around us. So as you were mentioning before, now implementation starts to happen. Two entities I'd like to talk about. Well, number one, the U.S. Department of Education, and then also the Department of Justice. So you see what's happening with the U.S. Department of Education right now. They've put out a portal that is, you can report sightings of illegal DEI. So the witch hunt is on. And you see that. And if you go onto the actual U.S. Department of Education, their official website, you'll see the articles of they recently removed $600 million of funding to organizations that are doing anything in regards to unconscious bias, any awareness in regards to race or ethnicity. They're removing federal funding from those things. So what you can do is be aware of what's happening from an educational standpoint, and also from the Department of Justice. How are they going to go about enforcing the law that's put in place? They were talking about they're looking at illegal DEI programs. So what you can do is, as you're involved with organizations, start to be really thoughtful about what are the parameters of what legal DEI looks like. What does legal diversity, equity, inclusion looks like? And that means not creating preferences based off any protected classes, but there's a lot of really good work you can continue to do in this space, and not just to get away and abolish everything you've done up to this point, because that's what they want you to do. They want you to abolish everything, whereas I implore people to get educated in regards to what they can and cannot do and how they can be safe from a standpoint, because, hey, funding is a for real thing. So we don't want you to put your federal funding in danger. We do want to adjust your programs so they're open and equitable for everyone in your organization, and adheres to the letter of what's happening right now in our current environment.
That's good. That's really good information. And I know that, again, we have the President Emeritus and National President of National Congress of Black Women here, where, again, one of the missions, or our mission, is to make sure that women have a seat at the decision-making table, so that when things like this happen, right, we are in place to understand it and to have a voice. And not just have a voice.
So I'll say this, and I'm unapologetic about it. There may be some national initiatives that want to dismantle diversity, equity, inclusion. But I will say to my Black sisters and brothers that we have already had a history of marginalization. There was never has never been any true equity. There's never been any true diversity, and there's never been any true inclusion. And so therefore, what our focus should be on to continue the role of building our communities, to continue to say that it is unacceptable for our children not to be educated. It is unacceptable for the disparity and the poverty that we see in every major community. It is unacceptable. And that when these things are addressed, when we have equal access to jobs, equal access to inclusion of decision making, then we can say that we need to really truly dismantle DEI. But let's not be confused. This message is not to us. This message is to say that, you know what, we've done everything we possibly can. Some of us have been educated and we've opened the doors and all of that. But the reality of it is that the average person can go outside of their door and see the true remnants, the true impact of what not having true diversity and equity and inclusion means. They can see it every day. So this is why it doesn't make sense. You know, when you were a young person, we had a rhyme about the emperor who wore no clothes.
Yeah.
This is a perfect example. Everybody kept telling the emperor, "Oh, look at me. I look good. I look good. Don't I look good?" And they say, "Oh, yeah, you look good. You look good." He had no clothes on. Until somebody told him the truth. He kept playing the role.
Yes.
And the truth is, there is no diversity, equity, inclusion, have not been.
Yeah.
We're still marginalized. We're marginalized in the education institutions, hospitalization, in our communities, all institutions that impact our life. We have never, ever been included.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
And that's why this conversation is so important for us to talk about how can we make sure that we are moving towards and ensuring that there are additional rights put in place.
Yeah.
There are additional resources for our communities. Because our communities have been shut off from the resources necessary to make the strides we want to make. How do we ensure that we are showing up, not just for presidential elections,
Right.
but for those elections for your state senators and state representatives that have so much impact in regards to how funding happens within your states.
Yes.
So those elections for your city council folks who are impacting how services are happening in the different communities within your city. We can't just show up every 4 years and expect change. We have to show up to every election with intentionality in regards to which representatives are going to help us, support us, and push forward legislation and also spending that is going to support our communities in the way we need to.
Absolutely. And since you began down that road, I want to throw a plug in. Again, we have upcoming elections, midterm elections, right? As George said, we cannot just think voting in presidential elections are going to impact our lives to the degree that we need them to. So get involved. We have a gubernatorial election coming up. We have a mayoral election coming up. We have city council elections coming up. Make sure that you are researching the people who are running for governor, who are running for mayor in your city, whatever city that might be, council seats, whatever city that might be. These elections are happening this year, some next year, but you have elections happening this year. So make sure you're doing the research. And I always like to say, just don't go to their website or, sit in town halls where they're speaking. Again, they're going to say what they want you to hear about them, which is nothing bad, right? Go back into their history, 10, 15, see where they worked. If you can, talk to people who worked with them. Make sure you are doing the research. Make sure what they're saying aligns with your vision and your values. See who's financially backing them. That will tell a lot about who that person is and what their agenda going forward will be.
And I would like to add to that too for you is that it's also going to be important for us to do the history on what you want in your local government. What do you expect? There's going to be talk about pay equity. not just in Cleveland, but there should be a discussion about pay equity in every major municipality in the state of Ohio, because those laws impact at the local level. We need to have those conversations. What about our safety forces? The diversity, here we are in 2025, yet in 59 municipalities, what is the diversity, equity, inclusion ratio in our safety forces? How are elected officials, regardless of who they are, how they're going to make sure that those doors of opportunity and representation are there? Is that a focus for them? These are some of the questions that I would pose to everybody to sit down and look at. If you're running for a school board, what do you want your school board member to have? What do you want them to represent for you? What do you want them to bring to the table? Local council people, we affect laws all the time in reference to zoning. As a council person, I have the responsibility of looking at how our zoning is impacted, where you can build a house, how you can build a house, how big it be, how long can you live there, how big can your business be, how long can it go vacant without you being penalized. All kind of things happen at the local level, yet they go unchecked. And this is where those laws start to dismantle, because if you dismantle them at the federal level and you get players at the state level that help, that support that, and then it trickles down to the local level, then you have 3 levels of government that are complicit in dismantling your rights.
You have said
and you never know it, and you never will know it happened.
You have said so much in that right there, that if we do not check it,
You got to check it.
if we do not push back on things that do not align with our values, with our community values.
So let's talk about checking it, because sometimes folks, they'll hear that and be like, that feels too big for me. Like, what can I do as a single person to impact that? Like, we so often overlook how we have as just a small collection of citizens. You get 2, 3, 4 of your friends together, you show up at a congressperson's office or a state rep's office to talk about what things impact your community. You have so much power with that. Because you're building community, and then getting involved with the local politics. There's so many things that you just mentioned, they happen locally. So for us to be engaged in that 1,000 folks who showed up to that town hall you're just talking about, they need to keep on showing up, because they have an opportunity to play an active part in regards to our democracy and what the future looks like. Things aren't over because this administration is going the way they're going. It is so vital and important, and it comes off a long journey we've had in regards to civil rights and being able to demonstrate and being able to show what our power looks like in numbers.
Yes.
So being able to find folks who are like-minded in regards to how we move our communities forward, and spending that time, investing that time, it is so crucial right now. So I tell people to show up.
I love that, because a lot of times, like you said, people don't know what they can do, what power they hold. Singularly and collectively, just 1 or 2 people, like you said, can show up and have a conversation just like this with their council person, with their congressperson. And it has a great impact. Wow, you don't need a lot of money. We have 6 minutes left. All right. You don't need a lot of money. You just need the motivation and the will to do.
And that's democracy. Listen, this is the beauty of the United States. Democracy is not just about the elected officials. It is about the ability of the populace to have a voice in the decision making. You have power. You have to know how to use it, when to use it, and why to use it. And when you know that, then this is going to turn around. But it's going to turn around because some people put some pressure.
Yes.
And that's the thing.
Yeah.
It's not going to turn around because time passed.
Yeah.
It turns around because people take collective action.
That's right.
And action has to happen.
That's right. Action has to happen.
Yeah.
I love what you both have said. You have said a mouthful. You have given, to our listeners and to our viewing audience some actionable items that we can do right now. We can show up to these meetings. We can show up, make phone calls, write letters, email. There are things you can do that won't cost you. You don't even have to move off of your couch if you
No,
don't
you
want
don't.
to, and still take action. So we have the power. We have to use it. Mobilize, organize, educate, advocate. That is what we are here to do. That's what we're going to do. We will turn the Titanic around. I love it. Thank you, guys. Thank you. I appreciate you so much being here today. You have given, hope and inspiration to us. We're going to continue on this fight, and please come back again. You have a seat at the table anytime that you want. Thank you. Please, let's give it up for Mr. George Sample and Miss Ruth Gray.
Give it up to you.
Thank you all. Thank you. And I do want to just, leave you with, again, NCBW and, the mission of National Congress of Black Women. Our mission is to advocate and empower the Black woman and her family in Greater Cleveland through social and political development, through civic education and community engagement, and rebuilding socioeconomic opportunity in our areas. Thank you again. We are here for the work. We are going to continue on. Please join us in our next episode, coming up every 2 weeks on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Thank you. And this is the station or channel where talk empowers and becomes action, and action becomes transformative change. Love and light. Join us again on our next episode.